The science of habit formation. Neuroscientists have found that habits are formed in a part of the brain responsible for automatic behaviors called the basal ganglia. When we repeatedly perform a behavior responding to a cue, the basal ganglia learns to associate the cue with the behavior and the reward. Over time, the behavior becomes automatic, and the cue alone is enough to trigger the behavior. The basal ganglia use a neurotransmitter called dopamine to reinforce the habit. For example, the basal ganglia release dopamine when we perform a behavior that leads to a positive outcome, such as eating delicious food or receiving a compliment. This creates a sense of pleasure and reinforces the behavior, making it more likely to be repeated. Forming habits can be challenging, and it's natural to wonder how long it takes for a habit to stick. You may have heard that it takes 21 days to form a habit, but is this true? Well, the answer is not so straightforward. In 2010, a study found that it can take anywhere from 18 to 254 days for different individuals to form the same habit. This means that the time it takes for a habit to become automatic varies greatly from person to person. This depends on various factors, including the complexity of the habit, your personality and motivation, and the frequency and consistency of the behavior. While the idea of a set number of days to form a habit may seem appealing, it's important to remember that forming habits is a process, not a destination. Instead of focusing on a specific timeline, focusing on consistency and repetition may be more helpful. It's also important to know that forming a habit is almost never linear. You will most probably experience setbacks along the way, but that doesn't mean you failed. Instead, practicing self-compassion and working towards your goals is important, even if progress is slow. The habit loop. MIT researchers have identified the habit loop by studying rats that were navigating through mazes. Initially, the rats' brains exhibited significant activity in the cerebral cortex when navigating the maze, but with repeated trials, the same task required less cortical activity. Instead, the basal ganglia took over, allowing the cortex to focus on more complex activities. This process, known as chunking, enables the brain to store sequences of actions, freeing up mental resources for other tasks. Habit formation occurs when our brain goes through 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. The brain constantly processes information from the external world, and when faced with a situation, it evaluates various options to determine the best response. After a lot of trial and error, the brain identifies the response that produces the most favorable outcomes. The response that generates the highest level of satisfaction tends to become ingrained as a habit. Each time a similar situation arises, the brain remembers and repeats the satisfaction gained from that response. Therefore, habits are solutions found to manage life's problems. The first stage of habit formation is the cue. A cue is an event or situation that triggers the brain to recognize an opportunity for a possible reward. The second stage is craving, where the brain experiences a desire to achieve the reward, becoming the motivation to act. The third stage is the response, where the brain takes action. If the action is easy to do, it will likely be repeated. It is less likely to become a habit if it requires too much effort. Finally, the fourth stage is the reward, which is the benefit or satisfaction gained from the response. The cue, craving, and response stages all revolve around the reward. The cue recognizes it, the craving desires it, and the response obtains it. By understanding this process, you can identify the habits you want to change or develop. You need to break the cue, craving, response, and reward cycle to change a habit. This can be done by identifying and changing the cue or finding a new response to the same cue. For example, If the cue for snacking is boredom, you can change the response from snacking to taking a walk or doing a quick exercise routine. In conclusion, understanding how habits form and how to change them is key to personal growth and success. By breaking the cue, craving, response, and reward cycle, you can change unwanted habits and develop new ones that support your goals. You can transform your life one habit at a time with awareness and effort.